The golden African savanna stretched endlessly under the blazing sun, a vast landscape where survival hung in the balance with every passing moment. In the heart of this untamed wilderness, a mother lioness lay protectively over her young cub, her massive frame casting a shadow over the tiny creature beneath her. The cub, no more than a few weeks old, gasped for breath, its small body trembling with fever. Every muscle ached, every breath came with difficulty, and the infection that ravaged its tiny frame grew worse with each passing hour. The mother lioness had not moved from her cub's side in nearly 3 days. She remained vigilant, her amber eyes scanning the horizon for any threat, her ears alert to every sound that echoed across the savannah. Her maternal instinct was as fierce as her hunting prowess, perhaps even stronger. She could not ease her baby's suffering, could not will away the illness that consumed him, but she could do something far more primal and powerful. She could protect him with every fiber of her being. She refused to leave his side, not even for a moment, not even to hunt and feed herself. Her body grew weaker with hunger, but her commitment to her cub remained unshakable, absolute, unwavering. The cub's condition deteriorated slowly but relentlessly. What had started as lethargy and a loss of appetite had evolved into something far more serious. The infection spread through his small body, causing swelling in his joints and making even the slightest movement unbearable. His breathing became labored, his eyes glazed and unfocused. The fierce predator blood that ran through his veins could not protect him from this invisible enemy. He was completely dependent on his mother's care, on her warmth, on her presence, and she gave everything, asking for nothing in return except for her baby to survive. Hour after hour, the mother lioness maintained her vigil. She lay as close as possible to her cub, her warm body pressed against his, her breath steady and reassuring. She would occasionally lower her massive head and gently lick his face, as if her touch alone could somehow heal him. She nudged him softly, encouraging him to drink from the water source nearby, but the cub had no strength to move. The lioness found herself in an impossible situation. Her cub needed help that she alone could not provide, but seeking that help meant abandoning him, exposing him to danger from predators and scavengers that prowled the savannah. The sun beat down mercilessly on the African plains. Time seemed to move both impossibly slowly and frighteningly fast simultaneously. The mother lioness could feel her cub slipping away with each passing hour. His breathing became shallower, his body temperature fluctuated wildly, and his responses grew even weaker. She knew with a certainty that only a mother can possess, that without intervention, her precious baby would not survive much longer. The realization filled her with a desperation she had never known before. In all her years as a hunter, as a protector, as a survivor, she had faced countless dangers. But this was different. This was her child, her legacy, her reason for existing. Several miles away, across the vast expanse of golden grass and scattered acacia trees, a rescue team was patrolling the savannah. Their mission was one of the most dangerous and rewarding work imaginable. They traveled through the wilderness, responding to calls about injured animals, sick cubs, and desperate situations where human intervention could mean the difference between life and death. The team consisted of experienced wildlife rescuers who had dedicated their lives to saving the creatures of the African wilderness. They knew the risks involved in every rescue operation. They understood that working with wild animals, especially large predators like lions, was inherently dangerous. One wrong move, one moment of miscalculation, could result in serious injury or death. The rescue vehicle bounced across the rough terrain, its occupants scanning the landscape constantly. They had received a report from a ranger about a lioness and her cub in distress. The information was vague. Details about the exact location were uncertain, and the condition of the animals was unknown. But the team knew they had to respond. Every hour that passed could be crucial. They navigated through the savannah, their eyes constantly moving across the horizon, searching for any sign of the animals in need. Then, finally, one of the rescuers spotted movement in the distance. Through the binoculars, a figure emerged. The unmistakable silhouette of a lioness, massive and powerful, lying on the ground. And beneath her, barely visible, was the tiny form of a cub. The vehicle slowed, maintaining a safe distance. The team knew that approaching too quickly or too aggressively could trigger the lioness's protective instincts, and that could turn a rescue operation into a life-or-death confrontation in seconds. The mother lioness sensed them before she saw them. Her ears perked up at the sound of the vehicle's engine in the distance. She lifted her head, her body tensing, her muscles coiling like springs ready to release. Her maternal protective instinct kicked into overdrive. This was a threat, an unknown entity approaching her vulnerable cub. She rose to her feet, positioning herself between the approaching vehicle and her baby. Her amber eyes narrowed, her breathing became heavier, and a low rumble began to form deep in her chest. As the vehicle drew closer, the lioness's agitation increased exponentially. She began to pace, her tail swishing back and forth in sharp, aggressive movements. The sound of the engine grew louder, and the vehicle came into full view. This was it, the moment of truth. The mother lioness took several steps forward, away from her cub, moving directly toward the vehicle. Her body language was unmistakable. She was preparing to attack. Every instinct in her powerful body screamed at her to eliminate this threat to her baby. She was not thinking about humans or rescue or the possibility of help. She was thinking only of her cub, of protecting him with every ounce of strength she possessed. The rescuers inside the vehicle immediately recognized the danger. The lioness was in full defensive mode, and she was massive, easily 500 pounds of muscle, bone, and raw predatory power. One of the team members quickly radioed for backup and alerted others to the situation. The driver of the vehicle made the critical decision to maintain their distance, giving the lioness space but keeping the cub in sight. They could not approach directly, not yet. The lioness was too agitated, too protective, and too dangerous. The mother lioness began to roar. The sound was absolutely thunderous, a primal scream that echoed across the savannah for miles in every direction. It was a warning, a threat, and a declaration of war all at once. She was telling the world, telling the rescuers, that this was her cub, that she would defend him with her life, and that any creature that tried to approach him would face her wrath. Her muscles rippled beneath her golden fur as she paced back and forth, never taking her eyes off the vehicle. Then suddenly, the lioness made her decision. She lunged forward with explosive power, covering the distance between herself and the vehicle in seconds. Her roar became even louder, more ferocious, more terrifying. She charged directly at the vehicle, her massive paws pounding the earth, her claws extended, her teeth bared. It was a full-scale attack, a mother defending her child against what she perceived as a mortal threat. Inside the vehicle, the tension was absolutely electric. The rescuers braced themselves as the lioness slammed against the side of the vehicle with tremendous force. The impact was so powerful that it rocked the entire vehicle on its suspension. The lioness roared again and again, swiping at the windows with her massive claws. The vehicle's structure held, but barely. The occupants could see the fury in the lioness's eyes, could feel the intensity of her desperation, and they understood completely. This was a mother at the absolute limit of her protective instinct. But the rescuers were professionals. They did not panic, did not retreat, did not give up. They understood that this aggressive behavior, as terrifying as it was, came from a place of love and desperation. The lioness was not evil, she was not mindlessly violent. She was afraid for her baby, and she was doing what millions of years of evolution had taught her to do, protect her offspring at any cost. Understanding this, truly comprehending it, allowed the rescuers to maintain their composure and continue with their mission. After several intense minutes of assault on the vehicle, the lioness seemed to realize that her attacks were having no effect. The vehicle was not going away. She could not scare it off with her charges and roars. She turned sharply and raced back toward her cub. She positioned herself directly over him, using her massive body as a shield. She would stand between her baby and the threat. She would let them come. She would fight them if she had to. But she would not abandon her cub, not under any circumstances. The senior rescuer on the team, a man named Marcus with nearly 20 years of experience with wild animals, made the decision to exit the vehicle. It was an incredibly dangerous move, one that could cost him his life. But he knew that without establishing some form of communication, some way of showing the lioness that he meant no harm, they would never be able to help the cub. He opened the door slowly, deliberately, making no sudden movements. His heart pounded in his chest, and adrenaline surged through his veins. He stepped out of the vehicle with measured movements. Every step was calculated, every gesture controlled. He kept his hands visible and moved at a deliberate, non-threatening pace. He was very aware that the lioness was watching him intensely, that her muscles were coiled, ready to spring at any moment. One wrong move, one sign of aggression, and she would be upon him with the force of a wrecking ball. Marcus began to speak in low, calm tones, his voice steady and reassuring. He was not speaking English or any human language that the lioness would understand in a literal sense. Rather, he was using the universal language of calm, peaceful intention. His voice was a rhythm, a sound that conveyed no threat, no aggression, no danger. He moved slowly toward the lioness and her cub, reducing the distance incrementally, giving the lioness time to adjust to his presence. The mother lioness watched him intently, her body tense, her eyes tracking his every movement. She did not attack, not yet, but she made it very clear that she was ready. Her lips curled back slightly, revealing her massive canine teeth. A low, rumbling growl emerged from deep within her chest, a warning that said clearly, "Come any closer and I will end you." Marcus stopped advancing. He stood his ground, maintaining the distance between himself and the lioness. He continued to speak in his calm, soothing voice, his entire demeanor conveying peaceful intention. He knew that time was critical. The cub was dying. Every second that passed brought it closer to death, but he also knew that rushing in aggressively would result in a violent confrontation that could harm everyone: the lioness, the cub, and himself. The tension hung in the air like a suffocating blanket. The sun continued to beat down on the savannah. The wind rustled through the grass, and in the middle of this vast wilderness, three creatures stood at a crossroads: a mother willing to kill to protect her baby, a rescuer willing to risk his life to save that baby, and a dying cub caught in the middle of this desperate struggle. Minutes felt like hours as Marcus stood there completely still, waiting for the lioness to make her decision. His eyes never left hers, but he maintained what animal behaviorists call a soft gaze, not staring aggressively, but remaining alert and present. Every muscle in his body was ready to react if the lioness attacked, but his conscious intention was to project calm, stability, and no threat whatsoever. He had done this before with other predators, other dangerous situations, but never had the stakes felt so impossibly high. The mother lioness remained in her defensive position, her body draped protectively over her cub, but something was happening inside her mind, a calculation taking place at the deepest level of her instinct. Her cub was suffering. She could feel it in the way his body trembled beneath her, in the shallow, labored nature of his breathing, in the heat radiating from his fever-racked frame. Her protective instinct was warring with another equally powerful instinct, the instinct to seek help, to find assistance for her dying baby. These two instincts were in direct conflict, pulling her in opposite directions with equal force. The cub suddenly made a sound, a weak, pitiful cry that was barely audible but absolutely heartbreaking in its desperation. It was not a sound of aggression or alarm, but rather a sound of pure suffering, of pain and exhaustion, and the desperation of a creature fighting for survival. The tiny lion let out another weak whimper, his body convulsing slightly with fever. That sound changed everything. The mother lioness heard her baby's suffering, felt it in her very bones, and something shifted within her. She looked at her cub, then back at Marcus, then at her cub again. The maternal conflict reached its crescendo, and finally, the desperate hope that this human might actually be able to help her baby began to outweigh her protective aggression. She did not stand down completely. Her body remained tense, her eyes remained watchful, her muscles remained ready to attack at the slightest provocation. But she stopped actively threatening. She no longer roared. She no longer advanced. She simply lay there, her massive body covering her cub, watching Marcus with an intensity that could have burned through steel. Marcus recognized the subtle shift in her body language. He had studied animal behavior extensively, and he understood what was happening. The lioness was giving him a chance. It was not a complete surrender of her protective instincts, it was not an abdication of her role as a mother. Rather, it was an act of desperate trust, a mother's acknowledgement that she could not save her baby alone and that she would allow this human, this stranger, this potential threat to try to help. Taking the change in her demeanor as a sign of cautious acceptance, Marcus began to move forward once again, but even more slowly this time. He covered mere inches with each step, moving with the deliberate pace of someone approaching a coiled cobra. His hands remained visible and open, non-threatening. His voice continued to emit those calm, low tones that seemed to have a soothing effect on the lioness's heightened nervous system. As Marcus drew closer, the lioness's body tensed even further, but she did not attack. She was allowing him to approach her cub, but every fiber of her being remained prepared to launch a devastating assault if he made even the slightest move that seemed harmful to her baby. It was an incredibly delicate balance, a tightrope walk between helping the cub and triggering the mother's lethal defense mechanisms. Finally, Marcus was close enough to see the cub clearly. What he saw made his heart sink. The little lion was in terrible condition. His breathing was extremely shallow and irregular. His eyes, which should have been bright with the alertness of youth, were glazed over and unfocused. His body was burning with fever. Marcus could feel the intense heat radiating from the cub even from a distance. The infection that ravaged the tiny body was clearly severe and advanced. This cub did not have days. He might not even have hours. He certainly did not have much time left. Marcus reached into his medical pack with slow, deliberate movements, making sure the lioness could see exactly what he was doing. Every action was telegraphed in advance, every movement was transparent. He pulled out a thermometer, a device that was designed to be used with minimal contact. He approached the cub slowly and gently inserted the thermometer into the cub's ear canal. The reading came back within seconds, 106.8 degrees Fahrenheit. Dangerously high, possibly life-threatening. The mother lioness watched this entire procedure with unwavering attention, but she did not interfere. There was something in Marcus's calm demeanor, something in the way he handled her baby with such obvious care and gentleness, that continued to convince her that his intentions were good. Her maternal instinct, which had driven her to attack moments earlier, was now driving her to allow this human to work, to trust him with her most precious possession. Marcus next performed a visual examination of the cub. He looked at the eyes, the gums, the ears. He checked the cub's responsiveness by gently calling out and observing the minimal reaction. Everything pointed to a severe systemic infection, possibly sepsis, possibly pneumonia, possibly a combination of bacterial infections that had overwhelmed the cub's young immune system. The condition was serious, critically serious, and if left untreated, the outcome was virtually certain. The cub would die, probably within the next 24 to 48 hours. Without treatment, this tiny lion's story was going to end in tragedy. The mother's vigil, her refusal to abandon her baby, her desperate hope that something would change, all of it would result in the death of her offspring. But Marcus was there, equipped with medications and knowledge and the determination to try to save this creature's life. The rescue operation had passed its most dangerous phase. Now came the equally crucial phase of actual medical intervention. Marcus returned to the vehicle and retrieved his emergency medical kit. He came back toward the lioness and her cub, moving with the same careful, deliberate pace. Inside the kit were antibiotics, anti-inflammatory medications, fluids for injection, and other tools of emergency veterinary medicine. The lioness watched as he approached again, her body still tense, but her acceptance of his presence now established. Marcus began with an injection of a broad-spectrum antibiotic directly into the cub's rear leg. The tiny lion barely reacted, a sign of just how sick he was. A healthy cub would have struggled and fought the injection, but this one was too weak, too exhausted, too ill to do anything more than flinch slightly. Marcus administered the medication with a steady hand, his years of experience evident in every movement. Next came an injection to reduce the fever and inflammation, crucial for giving the cub's immune system a fighting chance to combat the infection. Then came an IV line, a small catheter inserted into one of the cub's front legs to allow for continuous fluid administration. The fluids would help combat dehydration, which was a serious concern given the cub's high fever and lack of food and water intake over the past several days. Throughout this entire procedure, the mother lioness remained in position, watching, waiting, her body language communicating a delicate balance between protective instinct and desperate hope. She was allowing this human to work on her cub, and in doing so, she was making an act of faith. She was trusting that Marcus knew what he was doing, that his intentions were pure, that his interventions would help rather than harm her baby. The administration of the IV fluids was particularly critical. The cub's body had lost considerable moisture through fever and lack of intake. These fluids would help restore the body's ability to fight the infection. It was not a cure, but it was a crucial step in the direction of recovery. The clear fluid began to flow through the tube and into the cub's small vein, traveling into his bloodstream, beginning the process of rehydration and stabilization. As Marcus worked, he spoke to the lioness in those same calm, soothing tones. "You did the right thing," he said quietly, even though she could not understand his words in a literal sense. "You brought your baby where he could get help. You made a brave decision, and your baby is going to have a chance now because of you. You are an incredible mother, and your instinct to seek help was exactly right." The lioness listened to his voice, absorbing the tone and intent if not the actual words. There was something in his voice that communicated respect, understanding, and a shared commitment to saving the cub. She seemed to relax slightly, just a fraction, but it was enough to indicate a continued acceptance of his presence and his medical intervention. Over the next 15 minutes, Marcus completed the emergency stabilization procedure. He administered additional medications, checked vital signs, and began to formulate a plan for the cub's transport to a facility where more extensive treatment could be provided. The cub would need continued IV fluids, continued antibiotic therapy, close monitoring of vital signs, and possibly oxygen therapy depending on how his condition evolved. But there was a significant problem: how to transport a lioness and her cub back to the rescue facility without triggering the mother's protective instinct once again. The lioness had allowed Marcus to treat her baby, but moving the cub, separating him from her embrace, placing him in a vehicle, these actions could very well spark another violent response. Marcus needed to think this through carefully. He stepped back from the cub and the lioness, giving them space, allowing the lioness to see that the invasive procedures were complete and her baby was no longer being handled. He stood at a respectful distance and began to speak with the other team members via radio. They discussed options for transport, for sedation, for moving the lioness along with the cub, rather than attempting to separate them. The decision was made to sedate the lioness minimally, just enough to keep her calm, but not enough to fully incapacitate her. It was a delicate pharmaceutical balance, but it was the best option available. Marcus explained this to the lioness in his calm voice, though again she could not understand the specific words, but she seemed to sense that something more was coming, that there would be another phase to this rescue operation. An additional team member approached from the vehicle carrying a special tranquilizer dart. The plan was to deliver a sedative that would take effect within minutes, relaxing the lioness enough to allow for transport without triggering a violent response. Marcus positioned himself to deliver the dart from a distance, using a compressed air rifle that was designed for exactly this purpose. He aimed carefully, selecting a spot on the lioness's upper rear leg where the dart would have maximum effect but would cause minimal discomfort. The lioness seemed to sense what was coming, but she did not move. She remained in her protective position over her cub, watching Marcus with those incredible amber eyes. The dart was released with a soft pneumatic hiss. It traveled through the air in an arc and struck the lioness's leg with a slight impact. The lioness flinched, but she did not attack. The medication began its work almost immediately. Within seconds, the lioness's muscles began to relax. Her body became less tense, though she maintained her position over her cub. Her eyes became slightly glazed, and her breathing deepened and slowed. Within 2 minutes, the lioness was sufficiently sedated to allow for transport. She was not unconscious. She could still perceive what was happening. She could still see her cub, and she could still move if necessary. But her aggressive instincts were dampened, and her protective behaviors were significantly reduced. The medication had not removed her maternal instinct. It had simply taken the edge off her desperation and fear. Marcus worked quickly now, knowing that the window of opportunity created by the sedation was limited. He carefully examined the lioness's injuries and condition. She was significantly malnourished. She had gone days without eating while caring for her cub, and it was evident in the way her ribs were visible beneath her fur and in the overall gauntness of her frame. She had lost considerable weight, and her body was in a weakened state, but there were no obvious wounds or injuries requiring immediate emergency intervention. A specially designed stretcher was brought from the vehicle, a wide, flat platform that could accommodate both the lioness and the cub. It was made of sturdy material that could support the lioness's significant weight while still being maneuverable enough to fit through the vehicle's cargo area. The team carefully transferred the mother and baby onto the stretcher, keeping them in physical contact with each other. The last thing they wanted was to separate them in a way that would cause distress when the sedative began to wear off. The lioness was secured gently but firmly to the stretcher, using soft restraints that would not injure her but would prevent her from falling or jumping off during transport. The restraints were absolutely necessary. If the lioness awoke during transport and panicked, she could severely injure herself or the vehicle's occupants. The entire operation, from the moment Marcus first exited the vehicle to the moment the lioness and cub were secured on the stretcher, had taken approximately 30 minutes. It was simultaneously one of the longest 30 minutes and one of the quickest 30 minutes imaginable. Time had seemed to operate in a strange way, stretching and compressing unpredictably. The rescue team began to carefully move the stretcher toward the vehicle. The lioness's sedated eyes followed them, her head turning slightly to track the movement. She was aware of what was happening, aware that her baby was still with her, aware that they were being moved. The team spoke in hushed tones, maintaining the calm, peaceful atmosphere that had been established. As they loaded the stretcher into the vehicle, one of the team members checked the IV line one more time to ensure it was still properly positioned and that the fluids were continuing to flow. The cub's condition was still critical, but at least now he had a chance. He was no longer just lying in the savannah waiting to die. He now had access to modern veterinary medicine, to medications, to expert care. The lioness's desperate act, her decision to allow the rescuers to help, had quite possibly saved her baby's life. The vehicle's engine started with a rumble. The team began the drive back toward the facility. moving carefully across the rough savanna terrain, trying to minimize jostling that could disturb the lioness or dislodge the IV line from the cub. The mother lion remained sedated but conscious, her eyes tracking the movement inside the vehicle, her body tense but unable to act on any protective impulses that might arise. The journey back to the rescue facility seemed to stretch on endlessly, each bump in the terrain sending ripples of concern through the entire team. Marcus remained in the cargo area with the lioness and her cub, monitoring the IV line, checking vital signs, and watching for any signs that the sedative was wearing off prematurely. The cub's condition remained critical, his breathing still labored, his fever still dangerously high despite the anti-inflammatory medication that had been administered. But there was something different now, something that suggested the medications were beginning to take effect. The cub's body seemed slightly less rigid, as if the intense pain and discomfort that had gripped him were beginning to ease, just a fraction, but enough to be noticeable to someone trained in observing animal physiology. The lioness's breathing had become more regular, deeper, and more controlled. Her eyes, though still alert, had lost some of their frantic intensity. The sedative was working exactly as intended, dampening her desperate protective instinct without completely removing her awareness of her surroundings. She remained focused on her cub, and whenever the little lion made even the smallest movement or sound, her massive head would turn slightly toward him, her maternal instinct still operating at full capacity despite the pharmaceutical intervention. As the vehicle traveled across the savannah, Marcus reflected on what he had just witnessed and what it meant. In his nearly 20 years of working with wildlife, he had seen countless examples of animal mothers protecting their young with extraordinary determination and courage. But there was something uniquely powerful about what this lioness had done. She had not just fought to defend her cub, she had made a conscious decision to allow a human, a potential threat, to interfere with her maternal role. That decision had been born out of desperation, yes, but also out of a kind of wisdom that transcended basic animal instinct. She had recognized, at some level deeper than conscious thought, that she could not save her baby alone, and that accepting help was her best option. The vehicle arrived at the rescue facility approximately 45 minutes after departure from the savannah. The facility was a state-of-the-art veterinary center designed specifically for treating large wild animals. It featured specialized surgical suites, intensive care units with climate control, and equipment that could rival any major human hospital. The staff had been alerted to expect a critically ill lion cub and a protective mother, and they had prepared accordingly. As the vehicle pulled into the facility's main entrance, a team of veterinarians and veterinary technicians rushed out to meet it. Dr. Sarah Chen, the facility's chief veterinarian and a world-renowned expert in treating large cats, was among them. She had treated dozens of lions over her career, but each case remained unique, presenting its own set of challenges and complications. She took one look at the cub being transferred from the vehicle and immediately understood the severity of the situation. "Sepsis," she said to Marcus as they carefully moved the stretcher into the facility's main intake area. "Am I right?" "That's my assessment," Marcus replied, his voice calm but carrying the weight of his concern. "High fever, lethargy, possible pneumonia as a secondary infection. The mother is severely malnourished and dehydrated as well. She's been refusing to leave her cub's side." Dr. Chen nodded, absorbing the information. "The sedative should keep her calm for another 30 to 40 minutes. We need to get the cub stabilized and into intensive care immediately, and we need to begin treating the mother for malnutrition and dehydration as well. She's going to be anxious and potentially aggressive when the sedative wears off, so we need to have a secure holding area ready where she can see her cub but can't interfere with our treatment." The team moved with practiced efficiency, transferring the cub into a specialized medical bed equipped with temperature monitoring, oxygen delivery, and continuous vital sign monitoring. The IV line was carefully repositioned and secured. Additional monitors were attached to the cub's small body, electrodes to track heart rate, a pulse oximeter to monitor blood oxygen levels, and a thermal probe to track his body temperature. Dr. Chen performed a comprehensive physical examination of the cub, her experienced hands moving over the tiny body with both gentleness and clinical precision. She palpated the abdomen, checked the ears and throat, examined the eyes and mucous membranes. Everything she found confirmed her initial assessment. This cub was suffering from a severe systemic infection, likely originating from a wound or cut that had become contaminated and infected days ago. The infection had spread through his body, affecting multiple organ systems. "We need blood work," Dr. Chen said to one of her technicians. "Complete blood count, chemistry panel, blood culture to identify the specific bacterial organism, and get him on supplemental oxygen immediately. His oxygen saturation is too low." Within minutes, the cub was receiving oxygen through a small mask placed gently over his face. Blood samples were drawn for laboratory analysis. Additional medications were prepared, more powerful antibiotics, pain management drugs, and substances to support his immune system's fight against the infection. Dr. Chen worked with the focused intensity of someone who understood that every minute, every decision could determine whether this small creature lived or died. Meanwhile, the lioness was being transferred to a secure holding area that had been hastily prepared. The holding area was adjacent to the intensive care unit, separated by a clear barrier that would allow the mother to see and hear her cub while preventing her from interfering with the medical procedures. The team carefully transferred the lioness from the sedation stretcher to a secure medical bed in the holding area. They removed the restraints but left her in a space where she could not escape or cause harm. The sedative continued to work for several more minutes, but gradually, inevitably, it began to wear off. The lioness's eyes, which had been glazed and distant, began to regain focus and clarity. Her muscles, which had been relaxed and compliant, began to tense once more. She lifted her head, her senses returning to full alertness, and immediately began to look for her cub. When her eyes found the medical bay where her cub was being treated, she rose to her feet with an urgency born of maternal desperation. She approached the clear barrier that separated her from her baby and pressed her massive head against it, her eyes tracking every movement, every action being taken with her child. She could see the oxygen mask on his face, the wires and monitors attached to his body, the medical personnel moving around him with practiced efficiency. Her reaction was one of intense anxiety. She paced back and forth in her holding area, never taking her eyes off her cub, occasionally pressing her face against the barrier, as if willing herself to pass through it and return to his side. She made low, rumbling sounds, not aggressive but deeply concerned, deeply worried. She was a mother separated from her baby, forced to watch as others manipulated and interfered with her child, unable to understand that these actions were designed to save rather than harm. Dr. Chen observed the lioness's behavior and made a decision. She approached the barrier herself, moving slowly and deliberately, using the same non-threatening body language that Marcus had employed in the savannah. She held up her hands in a peaceful gesture and began to speak in low, calm tones, explaining to the lioness what was happening with her cub. "Your baby is very sick," Dr. Chen said quietly, even though the lioness could not understand the specific words. "But we are going to make him better. The things we are doing, the medicines we are giving him, the monitoring we are doing, all of it is to help him survive. You made an incredibly brave decision to let us help, and now we are going to honor that decision by giving your baby the best possible care." The lioness listened to Dr. Chen's voice, and something in the doctor's calm demeanor and focused intensity seemed to communicate understanding and respect. The lioness did not attack the barrier. She did not roar or threaten. Instead, she continued to watch, her body gradually becoming less tense, her breathing slowing to a more normal pace. Over the next several hours, the intensive care team worked around the clock, administering medications, monitoring vital signs, adjusting oxygen levels, and making the constant small decisions that characterize emergency medical care. The blood work came back within 2 hours, revealing exactly what Dr. Chen had suspected, a severe bacterial infection caused by a Staphylococcus species that had developed some resistance to common antibiotics. The lab also revealed that the cub's white blood cell count was extremely elevated, a sign that his body was mounting a significant immune response to the infection. Dr. Chen selected a combination of antibiotics specifically tailored to treat this particular bacterial organism. The medications were administered intravenously, allowing them to reach maximum concentration in the bloodstream quickly. Additional supportive care was provided, vitamins, electrolytes and medications to protect his developing organs from damage caused by the severe infection. The first critical 24 hours were absolutely crucial. During this time, the cub's condition would either begin to stabilize or would deteriorate further. There was no middle ground. The team prepared themselves for the possibility that despite their best efforts, the little lion might not survive. It was a possibility they had to acknowledge and prepare for, even as they worked with absolute determination to prevent that outcome. But something remarkable began to happen as the hours progressed. The cub's fever, which had been climbing dangerously, began to stabilize and then very gradually to decrease. His oxygen saturation, which had been critically low, began to improve. His heart rate, which had been racing at an unhealthy pace, began to slow toward more normal parameters. The medications were working. The body's immune system, given the support it needed through fluids, medications and oxygen, was beginning to mount an effective counterattack against the infection. By the end of the first 24 hours, the cub's condition had shifted from critical and likely fatal to critical but stable. It was a subtle but absolutely crucial difference. The little lion was still not out of danger. Infection could still return, complications could still develop, organ damage could still occur. But he was no longer on an inevitable path toward death. He was now on a path where survival was a real possibility. During those same 24 hours, the lioness was also receiving care. She was provided with carefully prepared meals designed to help her regain weight and strength after her days of fasting. She was given intravenous fluids to rehydrate her depleted body. She was examined for wounds, injuries, and signs of illness. Her condition, while not critical like her cub's, was still concerning. Malnutrition and dehydration, combined with the stress of her situation, had taken a significant toll on her body. But the lioness's greatest medicine seemed to be knowing that her cub was alive and receiving care. Throughout the day and night, she maintained constant vigil, pressing her face against the barrier whenever her cub stirred, watching his every movement, listening to every sound he made. When the monitoring equipment would alarm, indicating some fluctuation in vital signs, she would become anxious and agitated. But when Dr. Chen or one of her team would approach the barrier and explain what was happening, speaking in calm, reassuring tones, the lioness would settle once more. A remarkable bond had developed between Dr. Chen and the lioness. The veterinarian would spend time at the barrier, simply standing there, speaking to the mother in hushed tones, updating her on her cub's condition and progress. It was not a bond between human and animal in any conventional sense. Rather, it was a bond between two mothers, one human, one feline, united in their determination to save a child's life. By the end of the second 24 hours, the cub had improved enough to have his oxygen mask removed and replaced with a simple nasal cannula that provided oxygen at a lower concentration. His breathing, while still not completely normal, had become noticeably less labored. His eyes, which had been glazed and unfocused, began to show occasional moments of clarity and awareness. He was still extremely weak. Any movement required tremendous effort, but the signs of recovery were becoming unmistakable. The bacterial culture results came back, confirming the specific antibiotic sensitivity profile and allowing Dr. Chen to fine-tune the medication regimen even further. Additional supportive care was adjusted based on the cub's response. The team began to carefully introduce small amounts of nutrition through a feeding tube, providing easily digestible, high-calorie formulas that would help rebuild his strength without overwhelming his recovering digestive system. On the third day, something truly remarkable occurred. The cub, for the first time since arriving at the facility, opened his eyes fully and looked around with genuine awareness. His eyes found the barrier where his mother was watching, and his little face seemed to register recognition. He made a small sound, not a cry of pain or distress, but something closer to a greeting, a communication between mother and baby. The lioness's reaction was immediate and profound. She pressed herself against the barrier, her body language transforming in an instant from anxious vigilance to hopeful recognition. She made sounds back to her cub, soft rumbling sounds that carried maternal affection and relief. For a few minutes, mother and baby communicated across the barrier that separated them, neither able to touch the other, but both able to feel the other's presence and care. Dr. Chen, witnessing this exchange, felt tears forming in her eyes. In all her years treating animals, she never became entirely used to moments like this. Moments when the bond between parent and child, the primal force of love and protection, overrode every other consideration and spoke directly to the heart of what it meant to be alive. By the end of the fourth day, the cub's fever had completely resolved. His white blood cell count, though still elevated, was trending downward. His oxygen saturation was now normal without supplemental oxygen. His strength was gradually returning, and he was beginning to show interest in food, attempting to lap at a bowl of formula when offered. Dr. Chen made the decision that the time had come to reunite mother and baby. The lioness was moved from her separate holding area into a larger recovery enclosure where she could share space with her cub. The reunion was emotional. The mother immediately positioned herself close to her baby, examining him with her eyes and nose, verifying for herself that he was recovering. The cub, still weak but definitely improving, nuzzled against his mother's body, seeking the warmth and comfort that only she could provide. The lioness began to groom her baby, licking his face and body in careful, gentle movements, her entire being focused on her offspring. It was a scene of profound tenderness, a mother's love expressed through action and attention. Over the next 2 weeks, both the lioness and her cub continued to improve. The cub's strength returned gradually. He began to eat solid food along with his formula. His activity level increased, and he started to play small, tentative movements at first, but genuine play nonetheless. The infection was completely conquered, cleared from his system by the combination of antibiotics and his own recovered immune system. The lioness's condition improved as well. With proper nutrition and care, she began to regain the weight she had lost during her vigil in the savannah. Her coat became shinier, her eyes clearer, her movements more powerful. She was returning to full health, and she never once showed aggression or resentment toward the staff members who had cared for her and her cub. Rather, she seemed to understand that they had saved her baby's life, and that knowledge created a kind of trust that transcended the normal boundaries between human and wild animal. 3 weeks after arriving at the rescue facility, the lioness and her cub had undergone a complete transformation. The cub, now visibly stronger and more active with each passing day, spent his time exploring every inch of the recovery enclosure, playing with enrichment toys, and bonding with his mother in ways that spoke to the deep connection between them. The lioness, fully recovered from her ordeal, watched her son with the contentment of a mother who had faced the darkest possible outcome and had been given the miraculous gift of her child's survival. Dr. Chen spent considerable time observing the pair, documenting their recovery and assessing their readiness for the next phase of their journey. She stood at the barrier one afternoon, watching as the cub chased a rolling ball around the enclosure while his mother tracked his movements with her eyes, occasionally joining in the play with gentle swipes of her massive paw. It was a scene of pure joy, a celebration of life itself. "They're ready," Dr. Chen said to Marcus, who had joined her at the observation point. "Both of them are completely recovered. The cub's blood work is normal, his infection is completely resolved, and he's developed normally despite the severity of his illness. The lioness is at optimal weight, her strength has fully returned, and she shows no signs of lingering stress or psychological trauma." Marcus nodded, understanding the implications of her words. "What happens now?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Now we return them to the wild," Dr. Chen replied. "To the same general area where they were found, assuming it's still safe and suitable for them. They don't belong here in captivity, as important as this facility is for emergency care and treatment. They belong in the savannah, where they can live as nature intended. The mother has proven herself to be an excellent parent, and the cub will have every advantage for survival in the wild." The decision to release the lions back into their natural habitat was not made lightly. The facility's staff had to consider numerous factors: the cub's long-term health prospects, the mother's ability to provide for herself and her offspring in the wild, the ecological conditions of the region where they would be released, and the potential threats they might face from poachers, rival lions, or other dangers inherent to life in the African wilderness. But ultimately, there was no other choice. The lioness and her cub were wild animals, and the goal of any rescue operation was to restore them to their natural state, to give them back the freedom and independence that was their birthright. Keeping them in captivity indefinitely, even in a comfortable and well-maintained facility, would be a betrayal of their essential nature. The decision was made to release them in 2 days. That would give the team time to prepare all the necessary logistical arrangements, transportation, medical checks, and coordination with the wildlife authorities and rangers who managed the region where the lions would be released. It would also give the lioness and cub time to begin transitioning mentally from the routine of captivity back to the unpredictability and demands of wilderness living. Over those final 2 days, the enclosure was modified. The doors were left open to allow the animals to explore a larger outdoor space, a kind of halfway point between complete captivity and complete freedom. The cub, with his mother's watchful guidance, ventured out into this expanded territory, experiencing grass beneath his paws and wind in his face once more, reacquainting himself with the sensations of the natural world. The release day arrived with a clear sky and optimal weather conditions. The transport vehicle, a specially designed cage that allowed the animals to move around while remaining secure during transport, was backed up to the enclosure. The team prepared the lioness and cub by lightly sedating them, just enough to keep them calm during transport, but not so much that they would be disoriented when released. Dr. Chen performed one final health check on both animals. The cub's vital signs were perfect: strong heartbeat, normal respiratory rate, clear eyes and alert demeanor. The lioness showed every sign of excellent health and readiness for the challenges of wilderness living. Dr. Chen placed her hand on the cub's head one final time, a gesture of farewell and blessing. "You're going to do great," she whispered to the little lion. "Your mother is an incredible creature, and she's going to teach you everything you need to know to survive and thrive. Thank you for fighting so hard to live. Thank you for showing us what strength and determination really mean." The lioness and cub were carefully guided into the transport vehicle. The mother moved with protective awareness, ensuring her baby was secure before settling herself. As the doors closed, there was a moment of profound silence, a moment that seemed to hold all the emotion and significance of what had transpired over the past 3 weeks. The vehicle began its journey back to the savannah, retracing the route that had brought them to the facility what now seemed like a lifetime ago. Marcus rode in the vehicle with the animals, monitoring them during transport, ensuring that they remained calm and that their vital signs remained stable. He found himself reflecting on the entire journey, the desperate charge of the lioness defending her cub, the moment when she had decided to allow him to help, the countless hours of medical intervention, and now this final return to the wild. The journey took approximately 2 hours, and as the vehicle approached the area where the lions had originally been found, the landscape began to look familiar. The golden grass, the scattered acacia trees, the vast expanse of the savannah stretching to the horizon, all of it was the domain of these magnificent creatures. This was home. The vehicle stopped in a location that had been carefully selected by the wildlife rangers. It was in an area where there had been recent lion sightings, but where the specific pride that had originally occupied this territory had moved on, reducing the likelihood of immediate territorial conflicts. The location had adequate water sources and abundant prey species, providing the optimal conditions for the lioness to hunt and provide for herself and her growing cub. The vehicle's doors were opened, and the cage containing the lioness and cub was slowly moved into position. The team had discussed this moment carefully. They could open the cage directly, allowing the animals to exit immediately, or they could leave the cage open and allow the animals to emerge in their own time. Dr. Chen had argued for the latter approach, believing that allowing the lioness to control the timing of their return to the wild would be less traumatic and more natural. The cage door was opened, and the team retreated to a safe distance, maintaining visual contact but giving the animals space. For several minutes, nothing happened. The lioness remained inside the cage with her cub, her senses adjusting to the familiar environment, assessing for threats, evaluating the situation. Then, slowly, deliberately, the lioness rose to her feet. She approached the open door and peered out, her eyes scanning the savannah. Her nostrils flared as she sampled the air, reading the information it carried about wind patterns, other animals, and the overall condition of her territory. The cub, following his mother's lead as he always did, moved to stand beside her. For a long moment, they stood together at the threshold between captivity and freedom, between the world they had inhabited for the past 3 weeks and the world that was their birthright. The lioness made a low sound, not quite a roar, but something deeper, a vocalization that seemed to communicate a kind of recognition. She was home. She stepped out of the cage, her massive body moving with grace and power, her muscles responding to her commands with the strength that had fully returned through weeks of recovery and rehabilitation. Her cub followed, his smaller frame moving with the confidence of a young creature who had faced death and survived, who had been cared for and healed, and who was now ready to face whatever challenges awaited him in the wild. Once both animals had exited the cage, they stood together on the savannah, and the lioness did something that Marcus and the observation team would never forget. She turned back toward the cage, toward the vehicle, toward the humans who had saved her baby's life, and she roared. It was not an aggressive roar, not a threat or a challenge. Rather, it was something more profound, a roar of acknowledgement, of recognition, perhaps even of gratitude. It was a sound that carried the weight of everything she had experienced, everything she had endured, and everything she had been given. The roar echoed across the savannah, carrying for miles in every direction, a declaration that she and her cub had been given a second chance at life. The cub, inspired by his mother's vocalization, made his own sound, still young, still developing, but filled with the same spirit and determination. Together, they stood against the vast landscape, 2 lions preparing to reclaim their place in the wild, 2 creatures ready to face whatever came next with courage, strength, and the bond between mother and child that had proven stronger than any illness, any danger, any obstacle. The lioness turned away from the cage and began to walk across the savannah, her cub moving close beside her. She did not look back again. Her focus was forward, toward survival, toward the hunt, toward teaching her son the lessons he would need to know to thrive in this demanding environment. The team watched as the 2 lions disappeared into the grass, becoming smaller and smaller until they were finally lost to view, returning to the wild that had birthed them. Marcus stood silently, watching the place where they had vanished. Dr. Chen joined him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Do you think they'll be okay?" she asked, though they both knew the answer. "I think," Marcus replied slowly, "that Lioness has proven she's capable of anything. She fought for her baby against impossible odds. she made the decision to allow us to help when she could have attacked. She endured captivity and medical treatment without trying to harm anyone. If any mother lion out there can survive and thrive in the wild, it's her, and that cub has inherited her strength and determination. They're going to be more than okay, they're going to be exceptional. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the same colors that had illuminated the savannah on the day when a desperate mother had made the decision that saved her baby's life. The rescue team began to gather equipment and prepare for the journey back to the facility. Their work here was complete. But the story of the lioness and her cub did not end with their return to the wild. Over the following months, the wildlife rangers who patrolled the region would occasionally report sightings of the pair. The cub grew stronger and larger with each passing week, developing into a robust young lion under his mother's careful tutelage. The lioness proved to be an exceptional hunter, providing ample food for herself and her offspring, and her cub learned the skills he would need to eventually hunt independently. 6 months after their release, the rangers reported witnessing the cub making his first successful solo kill, a young gazelle that he had stalked and brought down with the skills and instinct, passed down through generations of lions. The lioness watched from a distance, no longer providing direct assistance but still maintaining protective oversight. Her son was becoming an independent hunter, a successful predator in his own right. 1 year after returning to the wild, the lioness and her cub were spotted by a research team conducting a long-term wildlife study in the region. The cub had grown into a young adolescent, nearly as large as his mother, with the physical characteristics of a healthy, well-nourished lion. The infection that had nearly killed him seemed like a distant memory, erased by time and the demands of survival in the African wilderness. The research team documented their observations, noting the exceptional health and vigor of both animals. They recorded video footage and took numerous photographs, creating a visual record of a rescue success story. The images and footage would later be shared with Dr. Chen and the entire staff at the rescue facility, providing concrete evidence that their efforts, their dedication, and their willingness to risk themselves to save another creature had resulted in genuine, lasting success. Dr. Chen kept one particular photograph on her office wall, a stunning image of the lioness and her adolescent son standing together on a vast expanse of golden savanna, the sunset creating a halo of light around them. Every time she looked at that photograph, she was reminded of why she did this work, why she dedicated her life to saving animals that most people would consider too dangerous, too wild, too fierce to care about. The story of the lioness and her cub became legendary within wildlife rescue circles. It was shared at conferences, discussed in academic papers, and told and retold by rescuers training new generations of wildlife professionals. It became a testament to the power of determination, to the strength of a mother's love, and to the possibility of redemption and recovery even in the most desperate circumstances. Years passed, and the cub matured fully into a magnificent lion. He eventually established his own territory, created his own pride, and fathered his own offspring. The genetic line of that desperate mother, who had made the courageous decision to seek help for her dying baby, continued forward, spreading through the lion population of that region. Her influence, her strength, her determination were passed on to her descendants, creating a legacy that extended far beyond her individual life. The lioness herself lived well into her senior years, finally succumbing to old age and the natural causes that eventually claim all living creatures. By then, her offspring had produced their own young, creating multiple generations descended from a mother who had understood that asking for help was not weakness but wisdom, that trusting a human rescuer was not surrender but pragmatism, and that the fierce drive to protect one's child could transcend species and fear and danger. And in a rescue facility thousands of miles away, Dr. Chen and Marcus and the entire team continued their work, saving animal after animal, applying the lessons they had learned from the lioness and her cub. Every successful rescue reinforced the understanding that had been crystallized in that desperate moment on the savannah, that compassion and determination combined with knowledge and skill could overcome even the most impossible odds. The lioness and her cub had returned the gift that had been given to them. By surviving, by thriving, by continuing their genetic line and teaching their offspring the wisdom they had learned, they had created ripples that extended far beyond their individual lives. They had become ambassadors for the possibility of rescue, for the power of second chances, and for the transformative effect that choosing to help can have on both the helper and the helped. In the end, that is what the story of the lioness and her cub represents, not just a dramatic rescue operation, not just a heartwarming tale of survival against odds, but a profound testament to the interconnectedness of all living creatures, to the power of compassion, and to the incredible transformations that become possible when one being decides, in a moment of desperate need, to trust another being with their most precious possession. The savanna continues to stretch across Africa, vast and wild and unforgiving. But somewhere within that vast landscape, the descendants of a lioness and her cub continue to live and hunt and thrive, carrying forward the legacy of a mother's desperate decision and a rescuer's willingness to risk everything to save a life. And that legacy, that continuing story, is perhaps the most beautiful outcome of all.